Come on, Ned. Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. I'm just loosening this area up because this bank on the side of the mound originally was grass, and we had lots of bulbs in, and you had a display, and then when they died back we cut it back and we kept it as cut grass. Over the years, all kinds of things have seeded themselves in here. Some of them are lovely, like the cow parsley coming through, but I want to start putting in spent bulbs from this year. That's bulbs that are flowered and finished. These are in pots, but actually there's no reason why I can't put them straight in the garden. And you can do this in a border. And that's what I'm going to do here. And the colour theme here on the mound is yellow and blue, so I've got some yellow and blue hyacinths. Well, some hyacinths that are yellow and some hyacinths that are blue. Not both at once. These are Delft blue, so take them out. Being slightly careful. There we go. So you can see, there are the bulbs. So I will carefully separate these out. Okay, let's just take each one. Let's take a few like that. There we go. See, that can go in there like that. Now you notice I'm not cutting back or trying to tidy up the leaves. It's really important that, because these must be allowed to die back naturally. That will feed into the bulb and form next year's flower. If I cut those off now, there's a real chance that there'll be no flowering next year. And if you have blind bulbs, it's very often because either they've been too dry or there hasn't been enough light on the foliage after they finish flowering. Okay. Longmeadow is pancake flat. I think we've got a fall of no more than a foot from one end to the other. So this is our only slope in the whole of the garden. And slopes are brilliant for most bulbs because most bulbs like good drainage. It's only fritillaries, Camasias, Leucojum that really can cope with damp soil and thrive in it. So a slope like this lends itself to be covered in bulbs. I quite like the way that they'll intermingle with what has naturally sown itself here. And it really goes back to this combination of working with nature. So use all the lovely natural things that are occurring and popping up and seeding themselves, but also plant in amongst them. So it becomes a creative act of which you are a partner rather than the controller. And I think that's really inspiring. Right. Now, we're going to join Carol in her garden, who shows us that you don't need a big space to grow really good food, and as well as being delicious, it can look beautiful too.
absolutely love my garden. We've been here for 47 years. And ever since we came, I've grown all kinds of ornamentals. Trees, shrubs, flowers, bulbs. But at the same time, I've also been growing vegetables because it's just wonderful to grow your own produce. But what happens if you've only got a limited area? I want to show you during the course of this year just how you can turn even a small area into both a productive space for vegetables and a thing of beauty with all sorts of beautiful flowers. This is a plot. It's about 8 feet by 5 feet, give or take. So it's pretty small, but I'm going to be growing so intensively in here that the whole thing eventually is going to be full of beautiful flowers and wonderful, wonderful vegetables. I'm not going to be planting everything today, but I'm going to be adding to it right the way through. All manner of stuff, but absolutely everything in here is going to be an annual. Most of it is going to be grown from seed, as were these sweet peas, which are the very first thing I'm planting in here. I'm growing several different sweet peas, but these are Kupani, which is this glorious purple and maroon one with wonderful, wonderful scent. Of course, sweet peas are climbers. So my husband Neil has made me this wonderful structure. It's a cylinder because it means that I can grow sweet peas and climbing beans. So I'm going to intersperse them with different climbing beans. Beetroot are indispensable. Roasted or cooked, sliced and pickled, they're delicious. They can be sown direct into the soil or into modules, then potted on and planted out. The variety I'm using is boltardy. It's not just the roots we eat. Those leaves are a lovely salad vegetable in their own right. In between them, I'm planting lettuce. This is a lettuce called Little Gem, and I'm putting them in 2 at a time, one behind the other. And the whole object of doing that is that I can harvest one first, and then the next one can grow on and get bigger. It's really my absolute all-time favourite lettuce because not only is it delicious in salads when it's young, you can cook with it as well. Just stick it in the pan for, less than a minute with a bit of butter and salt and pepper. It's delicious. So that's the first veg planted. And it might seem a bit random, a bit willy-nilly, but it's not. It's all part of a cunning plan. So I'm going to grow a squash at the front there. And then here, I'm growing a tomato. But tomato with basil is the perfect combination. So I'm going to actually sow some basil seeds right round here and then finally plant the tomato in. I'm not doing it today because they're not ready. But what I am going to do is plant a few flowers. Alongside the beetroot and lettuce, I'm planting some pink cosmos, informally. As they grow, they'll give the lettuce a bit of dappled shade. Cosmos have to be one of the most rewarding annual flowers. And with constant deadheading or cutting for the house, they'll keep going until late October. I'm going to sow quite a lot of vegetable seeds and flower seeds straight into the ground, but there are some things which are much better off grown on in pots or modules first of all. So this is a method I use for all beans, but the beans in question are these beautiful broad beans, the crimson flowered broad bean. So not only do you get the most delicious beans, but in addition, you get the advantage of these utterly glorious flowers. So I'm just pushing them in. You want them about half an inch or so, and then cover them with grit, which will retain the moisture once I've watered them, keep the weeds down, and make sure that they don't rot when they come up. But they're very, very unlikely to do that. I mean, the tough things, these broad beans. Here's what I did earlier. There's the top of the bean, and look already, that little root just starting to go down there into the compost. And then we'll get a shoot, and then we'll get some utterly glorious flowers. These broad beans I'll water well, and then I'll wait until they're a few inches high before I put them out. You can use exactly the same idea of combining edibles and ornamentals in a pot, and that's just what I'm doing here. This is orak. It's a relative of spinach. You can eat it, but it also looks gorgeous, and they will go really big and flower when it's way up high, but I don't want it to flower. So all you do, just take those two little shoots off the top like that. And that will encourage all those side shoots to spread out and give us a really nice bushy plant. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing, nip the top with all the cosmos too. Now already this plant is trying to branch, but if I nip out this bit here, that's all you need. So the cosmos I'm using in here is one called Purity. And you've guessed it, it's pure white. And it takes it a while before it starts to flower, but when it goes for it, especially if you pinch the top and you've got loads of flowering side shoots, it's absolutely lovely. Now, the great thing about doing this is that I'll put these things in now. They'll be joined by some of our crimson flowered broad beans, but I can add all sorts of things. Whenever I see something that I find inspiring, I'll squeeze it in here. And as for the main patch, we've only just begun. I'll be adding more veg, loads of beautiful flowers, and the whole thing's going to come together and just look absolutely wonderful and taste good too.
I do think that actually most vegetables that are well grown, vegetables, herbs and fruit, have a beauty of their own. And of course you want it to be beautiful too. Anyway, it'll be fascinating to follow this through for the rest of the series. What I'm doing here is planting out parsley. And to do that, we start off sowing it in a seed tray and then prick it out into individual plants of the plug. And you can see that here you have a plug. It's absolutely ready to go out, got a good root system. And give it space. Now, this is the key thing. I am placing this actually not in squares, but in a kind of grid. So each plant has plenty of space around it. And then as a result, you get a big, strong plant. Parsley is a member of the carrot family. They have a deep root, and they want to grow to a plant about that tall with a thick stem, and then they flower. So if you let it become well established with strong roots, you can then go on picking the leaves over a period of about 3 or 4 months. Those have now had a good soak. and I will leave them, but make sure they don't dry out for another 2-3 weeks before they're ready to harvest. We will harvest these, well into summer, by which time the next crop will be ready to plant it out. And actually the secret of all vegetable growing, it doesn't matter how much space you've got, whether it's very limited or huge, is planning ahead, succession. So you maximize the harvest from whatever ground that you have. And also not just maximize it in quantity, but also quality. Grow what you like to eat. That is the secret. Come on in. The potting shed and the greenhouse are my happy place. Taking plants on this journey from seed to full high performance out in the garden. So you have seeds that's sown and you get a seed tray full of seedlings like that. And then you prick them out and they look something along these lines into individual plugs. They then are grown on and moved over onto this side, and you can see these are all plants that have been pricked out and getting bigger. And at some stage, a lot of them are potted on. But before they can go outside, even if they're not tender plants, they need hardening off. And hardening off is something I really want to make clear, because it's actually terribly important. You need to acclimatize the plant to life outside in the big bad world. So from the greenhouse, they go to a cold frame. And this is round here. Now, at the moment, the cold frame is filled mainly with plants that have been pricked out. They're hardy plants, but they're protected from heavy rain. They get a little bit more heat from the glass through the sun, and it means they're not too cold. And then they go to the next stage, and you can see here we've got some wild carrot, sweet peas, I've got some salvias sitting here where they will remain for at least a week before going into the garden. They're protected from the cold east wind. They've got a hedge there, meaning that it's not too blowy, the sun is not too hot in the middle of the day, and it's not too cold at night. They will gradually acclimatize to life outside. And if you sow your seeds on a windowsill, that's fine. The next stage could be just sort of outside the back door or around the corner by a shed where it's out of the worst of the weather. That also applies when you buy a plant from a garden centre, particularly a young plant. So harden it off for at least a week in a slightly protected place outside. But there's another form of hardening off, which is also really relevant, particularly at this time of year. Come on, Nib. The other kind of hardening off is of plants that are perennial and can live for years as long as they are protected from the cold. So, for example, here we've got some agapanthus, some pelargoniums, lemon verbena, salvias, and this was, until last week, full of citrus plants. It's just enough to get them through the winter. But again, if you take them having spent all winter in a greenhouse and then put them outside just because it's safe to go, they're going to sort of blink in the sunlight and they literally just stop growing. They hunker down, and it can take them 2 or 3 weeks to get going again. Far better to gently introduce them and acclimatize them. And if I take a plant like the lemon verbena, so if I take this, it's starting, you can see new growth, which means it's coming into life. And it's the new growth that you've got to harden off. The woody growth is fine. That doesn't need any protection. It's these new shoots. Before I take it outside, though, it needs a really hard prune, as they tend to get very woody and leggy. Cut back to the lowest growth you can see, and this will result in a fresh flush of new leaves. Okay. What I normally do with lemon verbena is do a first pass like that, taking off any obvious pieces that are too long and straggly. And then when new shoots develop, do another prune. The tighter you can prune it, the better the end result. Oh, this is a heavy one. As the new growth emerges, it will do so into a slightly harsher environment than it was in the greenhouse, but it will adapt. And that's the key to all hardening off. All the trouble you go to, or whether you buy plants from a garden centre, give them a chance to adapt to your environment, acclimatise, and they'll be a lot healthier and happier as a result. Now, we have all kinds of different growing environments here at Longmeadow, but the one thing we don't do is have a floating garden. But Amy Chapman does.
Hi Gardeners World, I'm Amy. This is my narrowboat. I moved onto it in the autumn and I'm turning it into a little floating garden. Let me show you around. This is my little rooftop garden. I am trying to grow as many edible plants and useful plants and also plants for pollinators too. I have always loved growing my own food and I didn't want to compromise on that when I bought the boat. I've got these planters which are quite shallow, so I'm trying to choose plants that will suit a shallow depth of soil and also plants that don't grow too tall because I don't want them to obstruct my view when I'm cruising the boat. There's a lot of interesting things that you have to consider when you're growing on the roof. You don't want to put too much weight on one side of the boat. I am filling up this container with perennial vegetables, which are some of the easiest, lowest maintenance edibles that you can grow. These are Welsh onions, and you plant them once and they will live for years and years, and they'll just keep dividing and producing more and more onions. With watering, I'm worried about the sort of shallow depth of soil in the summer and keeping everything watered, so I think I'm gonna have to cover everything with a thick mulch and try and keep as much moisture locked in as possible. I've got a couple of these Babington leeks left. Leeks that will basically grow out into like clumps of little baby leeks. You plant them once and they'll give you multiple harvests. I started gardening about 5 or 6 years ago. So when I bought the boat, I knew that I had to find a way to make gardening work and turn the roof into my own little garden. So this is the front of the boat, also known as the bow. And this is where I like to have a lot of colour and cheerfulness because a lot of people that walk past the boat say how happy it makes them to see flowers. So I've got some honesty here, which is great for pollinators. It's just a lovely way to live and you always feel like you're really connected to nature and the seasons. This is only my first spring on the boat, but I'm hoping that by the summer it's going to be absolutely overflowing with plants. I'm hoping it can be a wild, abundant, magical garden. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed having a little look around my floating garden.
You know, when I moved to London at the very beginning of the 1980s, we very nearly bought a houseboat and wanted to live on it. But I turned it down because I thought I must have a garden, and I couldn't have a garden on a houseboat. Well, Amy has proved me wrong. Not only can you have a garden, you can have a beautiful garden. So that's fantastic. Now, the grass borders here, if you remember, I cut back at the very beginning of March, and it's brutal. You take everything out, clear it back to the ground, and it stays pretty empty for a month or so, depending on the weather. However, it's beginning to grow. Some are already up to knee height, and within a few months' time, things like the big miscanthus will be as tall as I am and grow taller yet. But the key thing about all these grasses, and this spot here, is that they are open to full sun. But I've got some grasses in my barrow, which are perfect for shade. This is the Woodland Garden. At the end of summer, we started to replant it as not just a woodland border, but incorporating the trees, incorporating the shade and making the most of it. This barrow is full of grasses that not only will cope with dry shade, but actually thrive in it. And if you get the right one, I think they look great in shade and in woodland settings. So that's what I'm doing. The first is one called Hakon and Cloa. It's become very trendy. It creates these low mounds, like sort of a low bubbling fountain that spills out, and the leaves bend up and then fall over to the ground. And if I plant it near the edge of a path, it won't grow too big, but it will just soften that edge, and it means I can plant it around the roots of trees. So this is going to do a job for me for that. That will spill out nicely. Let's have another spiller there. Tucked in behind the yew here. There we go. This can go here, like that. I wonder if we could get that in there. The key thing at this stage is not to try and be too controlling. Try it out, move them about. And then when you've decided where you want them, it's very easy. You just make a hole in the ground, take it out of the pot, pop it in, job done. Now, the other grass that will serve me very well in here is called Caesuleria autumnalis. And the name is a clue, because it actually thrives best in spring and autumn, semi-evergreen. So I thought that here I put 3. Now you notice I'm putting this in the clump. I'm actually going to get a third, because this is a grass that looks best in clumps or groups, or if you've got a lot, drifts. So I'm thinking something like that. Not too close to the hellebore, so maybe more like that. I'll get the rest of these in the ground now. But just a reminder that whatever you're planting at this time of year, even if it's something that thrives in dry shade, give it a soak when you plant it. Water it in well, and that sets it off to cope with whatever summer may bring. We're going to join Advolly now, who has gone up to Scotland, to Fife, to the Backhouse Rossi estate, where she revels in some extremely unusual and rare daffodils.
As a huge fan of daffodils, there's nothing to rival a daffodil festival in full bloom. And when those flowers carry history in their petals, it's even better.
And this array includes the National Collection of Backhouse daffodils, blooms created by one family over several generations since the 1800s.
To me, the oldest blooms often carry the best secrets and stories.
But one particular daffodil is here thanks to the brilliance and passion of several determined women.
The Backhouse family were originally bankers and Quakers. But alongside their work life, several of the Backhouse men started breeding daffodils, very successfully.
Initially, the only daffodils in Britain were the wild ones, which was seen as rather common. But as new varieties were produced in different colours and different shapes, they became very fashionable.
Then in 1884, Robert Ormston Backhouse, a banker and daffodil enthusiast, married Sarah Elizabeth Dodgson, having been introduced to her at a Quaker meeting house.
Sarah was the daughter of a pharmacist who grew up seeing her father using plants to prepare and dispense medicine. And on the back of this knowledge, a whole new era of backhouse daffodils began. Sarah had the perfect springboard. Her father-in-law had already cultivated a breathtaking collection which she inherited. She developed it into something entirely her own, creating a new range of daffodils in all shapes and sizes. This is Lord Kitchener, with its ruffled trumpet and contrasting white petals with a twist. Sarah named her daffodils with retail in mind. At the time, Lord Kitchener was a well-known military man, so by naming it after him, it immediately gave the flower selling power. Her tactics worked, and as she created more incredible daffodils, she caught the eye of other growers. This is Sunrise, with these gorgeous gold rays spreading from the centre. It was really popular, and in her papers there's an order for 1,000 bulbs at 2 shillings each. Some of her later daffodils sold for much more. Sarah set her heart on creating daffodils with different coloured trumpets or cups. Mohican was an early success, sporting a red edge, but a full red trumpet soon followed. This here is a classic Sarah Backhouse red cup daffodil, set off by these beautiful ivory petals. She named it after another daffodil grower called Dick Wellband, and it's truly striking. Obviously, none of this happened overnight. Daffodils can take 5 years from seedling to flower, and some of her varieties needed 3 crosses or more. But Sarah had the patience and passion. This is a list of just some of the daffodils that Sarah created. There are pages and pages of them, and these are just the A's, the B's and C's. So you've got Abundance, you've got Alba, you've got Albion Star, because all in all, she created over 500 varieties. She won countless RHS Awards of Merit and was the first woman to receive the coveted Peter Bar Cup. But one of her biggest achievements was the first ever pink-cupped daffodil. Pink cups don't occur naturally in nature, and it's likely it took Sarah over 20 years to create one. But when Sarah's descendant, Caroline Thompson, started tracking down the backhouse varieties, she couldn't find the pink cups growing anywhere. However, she did have inside knowledge. How did you find it, Caroline?
Well, it was my mother. She remembered as a small child, Robert Backhouse, her older cousin, coming to her grandparents' house with a gift of the pink daffodils. When we heard the story, decided to go down to Hertfordshire and have a look at what is now a nursing home's grounds and see if they were still there.
Amazingly, they were in the exact spot her mother remembered them being planted. These are so beautiful. They're not like a Barbie pink, are they? They're more like a salmon.
These I find beautiful because during the longest part of their flowering, they are this salmony coral pink from the tip of the rim right down to the base. To begin with, they come out a sort of yellowy colour, and when they're older, they fade to a whitey colour. But for that longest full flowering period, they are pink. and they are the first true pink daffodil. The public loved them, and they were most widely grown and most popular daffodil for about 90 years.
Are they later flowering?
Yes, absolutely, they are. Sarah Backhouse created narcissus that would flower early through to ones which would flower right the way through to mid-May. These will be flowering in our garden, and they are fabulous at that time of year. They come up and look like glorious fireworks.
These days, there is some irritation that Sarah's most famous flower is called Mrs. R.O. Backhouse, which is mostly Robert's name. But that was normal for the time, and her husband fully acknowledged his wife's prowess.
In a letter after her death, Robert made it clear exactly where the genius lay.
He wrote, "I hope to continue to care for her beautiful flowers, but I fear the supply of new varieties will cease."
I just know that she'd be delighted to know that several generations later,
A female relation would be keeping her legacy alive.
I love the fact that Mrs. R.O. Backhouse was discovered just down the road from here, in Hertfordshire. And I'm sure there's probably more lurking around the country somewhere, and the RHS would love to know if you have her in your garden. So there's Mrs. R.O. Backhouse and a couple of others. There's Mrs. William Copeland and also one called Sussex Bonfire. Those three are very rare, but they probably are out there and could be in your back garden. So if you think you've got them, or one of them, go to our website and it will tell you how you can let the RHS know and then what to do about it. Come on, Ned. Now, try to throw the ball. Go on, off you go. At this time of year, of course, we all want colour, whether it be rare, exotic, unusual colour, or even just the brightness, the freshness of green on a lovely sunny spring day. But actually, if you've got a shady garden or a shady corner, you can still make something that is really beautiful and use colour to do it. I've got here the ingredients for what I think will be a really good display. Nice big pot, crock to put in the bottom, and then your compost mix is worth taking trouble over. You can just use peat-free compost you buy, and that will work sort of 80–85% as well as a mix. But the plants I've chosen, which are ferns and fuchsias, like an open, loose mix. So I've added leaf mould. If you haven't got leaf mould, just think of something, maybe a bit of coir. I've added a little bit of sieve compost, and that has made a mix that is nice and loose, and the roots will get down in there and be cool. So half fill the pot. Now we'll start with the fern. It's Arthurium nipponicum red beauty. And this Arthurium is special because the leaves have colour. They are suffused with a sort of grey, silvery stain, and this beautiful burgundy sort of central stem going down the frond and going out into the side fronds. It does not like being dry, so wherever you put this pot, you've got to have access to water, and remember to water it at least weekly. I'm going to plant my centrepiece towards the back. If you're going to go see round the pot, obviously it needs to go in the middle. And the old saying that you have a pillar, a filler, and a spiller works pretty well, but this has to class as the pillar. And so we'll take it out the pot and position it like that. A little bit more around it. But that leaves plenty of space for the next addition. Now, my filler is a fuchsia called Annabelle. Annabelle, very well-known fuchsia, got lovely, very pale flowers. It's a bushy plant, and fairly upright. In fact, you quite often see Annabelle grown as a standard. So it's got one central stem and then a circular top. But the one thing to remember about fuchsias is they do need good drainage. They don't like to be too wet. So if I'm watering the fern a lot, I must make sure there's drainage, so they're not sitting in soggy compost. So that goes in the middle ground, like that, and like this. I've got 3, and then a little bit more compost in the front. And now I've got my foreground for the spiller. And this is another fuchsia called Harry Grey. This is the palest of pinks that will spill in profusion over the edge of the pot. These plants are very dry, so I'm going to have to give them a good soak. Okay, I'm just filling around them. Final thing to do is put it in position and water it. Now that can go down in front of this pot, which of course is also geared for shade. And actually, even in midsummer, this only gets about 4 hours of sun, but this will survive and thrive. I'm confident about that. Now, the next thing to do is to water, and that really is important. It will take a month or so before the fuchsias start to flower. The great thing is that these will look at their best when other things are failing. So they should look good in the summer and really at their best in September and October. Come on. Come on. Good boy. Well, the RHS Chelsea Flower Show is getting closer, and I know that everybody involved, whatever they're doing, they will be working around the clock to make sure that on the big day, things are as perfect as they possibly can be. And we went to visit a nursery, growing enormous trees that look as though they're completely natural in the show garden. And Elliot Barden of Majestic Trees showed us around.
I've always been into horticulture. It's been my dream job from day one, but I really refined my interest for trees while I was studying at Kew, and linking that with my love of production of plants meant that I could only really work at a tree nursery. The trees are important for the landscape because of all the ecosystem services that they provide. Things like wind dissipation, flood mitigation, carbon sequestration, habitat creation, all of those sorts of things. But at the same time, they're important for the human element as well. Because of things like social health and mental well-being, a lot of studies have been brought in that horticulture can be healing and it can be good for the mind. Tree selection is really important. My 3 guidelines would be select the right species, in the right place, and for the right reason. There's many aspects that you need to consider, such as ultimate size and space, but more importantly, how the tree is going to adapt to climate shifts. So there's a lot of research been done, and there's some studies that are suggesting London's going to have the climate of Barcelona by 2050, possibly Azerbaijan by 2100. And a lot of our British native trees are simply not going to be resilient to those climates in that era. So that's when we need to start looking at perhaps some exotics that are going to fill the space where the natives are leaving, but also provide the same ecosystem and biodiversity benefits. Non-natives are referred to as exotics. I think there's somewhere between 3,600 and 4,000 varieties in cultivation compared to our native tree species range, which is somewhere between 30 and 35 species. So to have that diversity in the treescape will enable them to be resilient. I joined the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew in 2013, fresh out of school, and it was a steep learning curve. Kew is somewhere that you always have some connection. And today we're working together, looking at scientific research and how that can be put to best use in the commercial trade.
It traps that moisture on the fine hair, which cools the leaf down. My name's Kevin Martin. I'm head of the tree collections at Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew. So I'm really trying to understand what the landscape's going to look like in 100 years' time. So with the research that I do, specialising in urban trees, it's critically important that we get the commercial nurseries on board, because I can do research and I can find some of the most fantastic trees that are going to be more resilient to our future climate. When we think about selecting trees, we have to really stop and think deeply now. We can't just select trees on horticultural merit, what the tree looks like, so its bark, the colour of its leaves. What we need to start thinking deeply about is the function. We're looking at cooling, we're looking at shade, we're looking at rain interception. They're the questions we need to ask ourselves now, not just what that tree looks like. Chelsea's going to be so important because when we think about trees and when we think about selecting trees, we need a cultural change. And that's the biggest thing. And where else are you going to be able to start that conversation about cultural change than at Chelsea?
So Kevin, these are the possible selected trees for our Chelsea stand here. Start with this Cercis canadensis forest pansy with a beautiful purple leaf. It's got some flowers on.
Great, they're a really standout tree. Very well suited, especially for those urban, dry environments. And that's what we needed to try to explain. Just because they're resilient trees doesn't necessarily mean they're boring.
So next we have Taxodium disticum, which is famous for thriving in swampy, wet conditions.
If we're having an area that's prone for flooding, for instance, these are the trees we need to start looking at. And they're just really good ornamental trees, but they have a purpose now.
One of the last trees to talk about is Sorbus ullingensis olympic flame, which has lots of benefits in terms of climate resilience and benefits towards other species.
It's got that spring flower. It's really important for our pollinators. And then we got that food source for the birds when the berries come out. And again, look at that for a stunning architectural tree, but yet it's still providing other services. And that's what makes trees like this so stunning to have in our gardens. The trees we plant today, they're going to see a different world in 100 years' time. The climate's going to be very different, the growing conditions are going to be very different, so that's really the scale that we're working in. And it's critically important we get that message out there now, because by planting trees, we can then help with climate mitigation. And trees are going to be one of the main backbones of this mitigation as we go forward for the next few decades.
So Kevin, it's been really hard overall selecting trees for Chelsea, which not only look special and, pleasing for people to see, but also have some of these traits we've been talking about. So overall, I hope I've done a good job, but the proof will be in the pudding when it comes to judging, won't it?
It will do, yeah, it'll be all down to the judges.
I think this idea of having to choose trees in response to climate change is something we're all having to wrap our heads around. And it's actually quite a big ask, because we've grown up with trees as such a significant part of our culture in literature, in art, in poetry. The shapes and outlines and features of our native trees are such an important part of our lives that to change that, well, it may be interesting, but it's going to be quite demanding. But at the same time, we don't have to abandon a lot of the trees that we love. And this year has been a brilliant year for blossom. And the crab apples, this is a crab apple called Everest. And it's such a joy to have that blossomy week with these white flowers floating above the paradise garden. And then they fall like confetti and the year moves on. But for that 1 week, it is paradise indeed. Okay, come on. Now, you're going to help me cut the thyme? Are you? Are you? I think it's probably not a good idea, okay? What would you like to? Look, it smells delicious. Stop showing off. Right. This is thyme, common thyme. And like all Mediterranean herbs, it doesn't really want to grow here at Longmeadow, which is why I've got it growing in a pot. But thyme and all Mediterranean herbs have this tendency to become very woody. And so the answer, if you're growing it for the kitchen, is to trim it hard now so you get a new flush of leaves. So that's what I'm going to do here. Certainly start off by cutting off all the really old, bare growth like that. And go hard. When you're cutting back any plant really, but certainly these Mediterranean herbs, as long as you cut back to something, in other words, there's fresh new growth below your cutting point, it'll regrow. Whereas if you cut just into old wood and just leave a bare stem, the chances are it won't regrow. And that applies to lavender, to rosemary, to sage and thyme equally. It will look a little bit sort of cropped for a week or two, but it will grow back. These plants probably will only serve this year, and then they'll be irretrievable, and we'll have to start again. And I think probably with time you have to think of replacing it at least every 3 years, if not every other year. So I've trimmed this back, but I'm also going to sow some seed so that I know next year and the year after I can replace these plants and lots of others beside it. When you're sowing the seed, just as growing the plant, just remember where it comes from. It needs poor soil and lots of drainage. So don't add any garden compost to your seed mix. There's no need to do that. But do add some extra drainage if you possibly can. It could be sand, it could be grit, vermiculite, anything just to loosen it up. So I've added vermiculite to a coir-based compost. Just level it out. Now, thyme seed is pretty small. So if you see the seed here, there we go. Now each one of those, of course, is a potential plant. And the fact that they're brown and the compost is brown means you can't see where you've sown, but just try and sprinkle it as evenly as you can. The main thing to do is to avoid grouping in any one area, because the seedlings and the ultimate plant will do much better if they have a decent amount of room from the outset. Now, I'm not compacting this. All I'm doing is just making sure that the seeds have good contact with the compost. With most seeds, I would then cover that with either some more compost or some vermiculite. But thyme seedlings need light in which to germinate. So leave them open like that. Label them. This is just straightforward thyme. Now, if I watered that from above, however gently I did it, there is a slight risk that it will move the little tiny seeds to the edge of the container. So much better to water it from below. So just have a shallow tray, pop it in, and leave it until you can see the compost staining with the water. Drain it, put it somewhere bright. Okay, that's a job which will bear harvest sometime in the future, but here are some jobs for this weekend. When your tulips have finished flowering, snap off the seed heads. This is a very satisfying thing to do because they come off easily. Don't cut back the stem and lead the leaves. But this means that all the goodness, instead of going into making seeds, will go back into the bulb for next year's flower. If you grow tree ferns and have protected them over winter, now it's safe to unwrap them. Release the fronds. If they're looking raggedy, you can cut these right back because they'll soon be replaced. But on the other hand, if they're still looking good, leave them for a while. In either case, it's really important to give them a good soak. And tree ferns have many of their roots on the trunk, and this is what you need to keep moist. So soak the fronds and the trunk rather than the roots in the ground. It's time to sow sweet corn. Either use a 3-inch pot, sowing 2 seeds to a pot and then removing the weakest of the 2 seedlings, or 1 to a plug, but do make sure it is the deepest plug that you can find. Press them gently into the compost, cover them over, and then water them well. And do so from above, because with that depth of compost, they don't soak up so well. Put them somewhere warm to germinate. The heat is important, but if they're warm enough, the seedlings should appear in a week or so. I want to finish, if not on a high note, a low one which I hope actually makes everybody feel a bit better, because I'm going to finish with a disaster. The garden's looking lovely. We work really hard to make it look as good as possible, but still things go wrong, and it happens to all of us. And here we have, in the cottage garden, a rose, or at least it was a rose, called Ypsilanti. A Gallica rose, beautiful flowers, and like most Gallicas, seemingly just able to cope with anything. But this has got hit by fire blight. And fire blight is a bacterial infection which looks as though it's been blowtorched, hence the name fire blight. All the rose family are prone to it, and we've got it in the garden, and it's never going to go away. But because of our very wet, warm winters, that makes it worse. So there's not much you can do about it. What I will do with this is cut it back, burn the offending stems, dig out the roots and burn those too. If you can't burn them, then pack them up and get them taken away to the council tip. And I won't replant into it till the autumn. When everything is clear, I will then clean out the soil a little bit and put another rose in that is less prone to fire blight. But for the moment, it's just a pity. Nevertheless, everything else in the garden is looking wonderful. Next week, we're going to join Joe and Rachel at the RHS Malvern Spring Festival. And I will see you back here at Longmeadow in a couple of weeks' time. So until then, bye-bye.